The wind had a way of sighing through the cottonwoods like it remembered something the rest of the land forgot. Dust swept slow across the plains, and the sun slouched low behind Colt Merrick as he fixed the western fence post, again. The same one always leaning like even the land was tired of standing. He drove the last nail with a grunt and leaned back on his heels. The ache in his spine didn't surprise him anymore. It lived in him like an old tenant that didn't pay rent but stayed anyway. He wiped his brow with a threadbare handkerchief and let his gaze drift across the dying afternoon. That's when he heard it. Not the wind. Not the crows. A voice. "You look sad, rancher. Want to meet my mommy?" He turned so slow it might have seemed he hadn't heard. But his boots ground the dirt and his hand went to the hammer at his belt. Instinct, not aggression. She stood just past the gate, no more than 6 or 7, barefoot, with a tin lunch pail clutched tight to her chest. Her dress hung off her shoulders like it had belonged to someone taller once. Freckles bloomed across her cheeks like pollen, and her hair, the color of old pennies, blew wild in the breeze. He didn't speak. She tilted her head. "You look like somebody who don't laugh no more." Still Colt said nothing. Words didn't come fast to him on a good day, and this wasn't one of those. "I brought you something," she added, shaking the lunch pail gently. "But it's not for your mouth. It's for your eyes." He frowned. She didn't flinch. Colt wiped his palms on his trousers and took a cautious step forward, careful not to startle her, though she didn't look the kind to spook. She was watching him with that strange stillness kids sometimes had when they were born into hard lives and learned too soon how to read a man's face. "Where's your folks?" he asked, voice hoarse from disuse. She pointed behind her. Not toward the road. Not toward town. Just behind. "You alone?" he asked. "No," she said. "I got mommy. But she don't come out when the wind's high." Something in the way she said it made his ribs go tight. He glanced toward the ridge, expecting maybe a horse tied to a post or another child or something, anything, but the land stretched empty save a trail of flattened grass. She turned. "Come on. She's waiting." She said today might be the day. He didn't move. "You fixed that fence 3 times already," she added. "Ain't gonna hold if your heart ain't in it." That did something. Not like a slap. More like a pebble dropped in water, small but it rippled. He followed. She led him across his own land like she belonged there, walking with a barefoot confidence, like thorns didn't dare touch her. They passed his barn, then the old corral where no horses lived anymore. Past the creek, dry and cracked, where frogs used to sing. "Name's Rosie," she called over her shoulder. "Mommy said I could choose it myself when I turned 6. Before that, folks just called me Girl." He didn't ask why. The trail dipped into a stand of trees he never gave much mind to, tamarisk and pin oak, mostly, where deer sometimes bedded and snakes warmed their bellies on stones. But beyond them, in a hollow so still it felt like breath held too long, there sat a cabin he'd never noticed. Weather-worn, leaning to one side like an old man mid-prayer. The windows were patched with cloth. Smoke whispered from the crooked chimney, thin as a hair. Rosie marched up to the door and knocked twice with the flat of her hand. "Don't run, Mommy," she said, quiet but clear. "I brought the man." Colt stayed back. There was something sacred in the moment, not holy but private like a page half-written. The door creaked. Light spilled out, golden and trembling, like it had never touched the outside before. She stood in the frame. He'd known her once, though time had curled her edges and softened the shine in her face. Willa Mabel. The girl who used to sing while sewing at her father's mercantile. The one folk said was not quite right, after her mind drifted following some man's betrayal. He remembered the laughter. The cruel kind. Marvin Deeks tossing her work into the street, saying it was cursed. The whispers, touched in the head. Talks to herself. Still wears her wedding veil. But what he saw wasn't madness. She stood barefoot, round in the hips, gentle in the shoulders, wearing a homespun dress dyed soft with time. Her eyes, wide and ash-gray, blinked like the light surprised her. In one hand she held a needle still threaded mid-stitch. Colt touched his hat. "Ma'am?" Her gaze flicked to his boots, his hands, then his face. "Didn't think you'd come." "I didn't think I would either." Rosie skipped past them and vanished into the cabin, leaving her pail on the step. Willa stepped aside. "I didn't invite you," she said, but there was no edge in it. Just air. He didn't cross the threshold. "You need something?" she asked. He shook his head. "I ain't got coffee. Just tea and quiet." He almost smiled. She waited. The silence grew roots between them. Then, as if embarrassed by her own stillness, she moved to close the door. "I seen you," he said suddenly. "Last market day. Giving away strawberries." Couldn't sell him, she replied. Folks don't take fruit from ghosts. I would've, he said. Her lips twitched. Not a smile. Something else. She nodded toward the pale rosy left. She puts wild things in there. Found bones once. Another time, a dandelion with 6 heads. I thought it was lunch, Colt muttered. No. She don't give away food. Just wonder. For a moment they stood like that, 2 souls holding separate ropes, not sure whether to pull or let go. You still making dresses? He asked. She looked down at the needle in her hand. Not for anyone who wears 'em just to be cruel. He didn't know what to say to that. A crow called above, sharp and echoing. Rosie appeared behind the curtain, her little face framed in yellow light. She wants you to come inside, Willa said softly. I ain't much for company, he said. She nodded once and closed the door, not angry, just done. Colt stared at the pail on the step. After a minute he knelt and opened it. Inside, a 4-leaf clover, a broken button carved like a bird, a candle stub, and a piece of fabric with his initials stitched in crooked thread. He didn't remember giving her his name. The wind picked up as he rode back across the field, evening sinking into the land like a lullaby. He didn't light the lantern that night. Just sat on his porch with the pail beside him and the clover between his fingers. Morning came with frost on the rails. He didn't go to town. By noon he found himself carving a piece of wood into a toy horse, something he hadn't done since before the baby came too early and the wife went too quiet. He wrapped it in cloth and left it on their porch that evening without a note. He didn't knock. The next day the cloth came back. But instead of the horse, it held a button-up shirt, mended at the collar with sky-blue thread. No words were needed. Not yet. The wind was quieter now. On the 3rd evening, as he finished fencing the eastern ridge, he heard humming. Not singing. Humming. Rosie stood on a tree stump, arms out like wings swaying in the breeze. Behind her, Willa sat beneath a tree, mending a ripped apron. They didn't call to him. But Rosie, without looking, said, You got the horse, didn't you? He's scared of the dark. Colt nodded. He'll sleep by the window. He told me you're lonely. I ain't. Then why do you look like someone who got left behind on accident? He didn't answer. Rosie hopped down, trotted up, and pressed something into his hand. Another clover. This one not real, stitched from fabric, tiny and frayed. You look thirsty, she said. Colt looked down at the gift. For what? She tilted her head. A place to put your sorrow. The wind shifted. The light changed. Willa looked up from her sewing, her eyes meeting his across the space like a question neither of them was brave enough to ask. Colt turned and walked away. But the clover stayed in his palm, warm from the child's touch. That night he couldn't sleep. Not because of dreams. But because something was moving again inside him. Something quiet and afraid of sudden light. At dawn, he saddled the horse and rode not toward town, but toward the cabin in the hollow, carrying 2 warm biscuits wrapped in a napkin. He didn't expect thanks. But he didn't expect what he found either. The door was open. The fire out. And on the porch sat Rosie, clutching her pail tight. Tears streamed down her freckled cheeks. She won't wake up, mister, she whispered. And I don't know if she's sleepin' or leavin'. The sky broke open in soft gray sheets the morning Willa Mabel woke again. Colt Merrick had slept upright on a stool outside the cabin, rain spotting his shoulders, the clover Rosie had stitched still folded in the curve of his vest pocket. She hadn't died, though her breath had grown thin and brittle as old lace. Fever, maybe. Fainting spell. Something worn and womanly, the kind folks didn't speak of unless it brought death or scandal. But she was breathing again, and Rosie had clung to his arm as he helped carry her inside. Now Willa lay curled under a patched quilt with embroidered swans stitched into the corners. Colt sat beside the hearth, fire rekindled, boots drying near the stones. He hadn't meant to stay, but the girl hadn't asked. She just climbed into his lap and wept until she slept, clinging to his vest like it was stitched from hope itself. Willa stirred. Her eyes fluttered, blurred and blinking. She saw Rosie first, then the fire, then him. You didn't have to stay, she murmured. He didn't answer right away. Didn't have much else to do. You could have done nothing. I've done that before. Didn't work out. The light flickered in her eyes as if trying to find the thread between sarcasm and sorrow. She sat up slow, winced, then touched her forehead with a pale hand. Dizzy. You fell. I don't fall. I drift. Rosie, still asleep against Colt's chest, murmured something and burrowed deeper. Willa smiled faintly. She don't trust easy, she said. Colt didn't move. She trusts you. She's the only one who ever has. The room quieted. Rain ticked soft against the roof, and steam rose from Colt's boots. He glanced around, noticing the details he hadn't before. Lace curtains made from old wedding veils, a row of thimbles lined on a shelf like trophies, and dried lavender tied with red thread above the stove. "You sewin' for anyone these days?" he asked. "Just ghosts," she replied. "They don't complain about the fit." "You still good at it?" "I was never good. Just stubborn. I kept stitchin' till it looked like love." Colt's jaw worked, but he said nothing. He laid Rosie gently on a cot by the wall, covered her with a shawl, then stood. "I ought to go. You should eat first." "I'll be fine." She looked down at her hands, then up again, steady. "Then take some tea. For the road." He hesitated. "All right." She moved slow, like someone testing the bones of a memory. As she poured the tea, her sleeves slid down, revealing a scar across her forearm, pale and jagged like lightning caught in skin. She noticed his glance. "From the shears," she said, soft. "Back when I used to make wedding dresses for girls who'd spit on me by spring." He didn't ask. Didn't need to. Willa handed him the tin cup and sat opposite him, both of them near the fire, Rosie between them. "You ever marry?" she asked. Colt looked into the tea as if it might answer for him. "Once." "She leave?" "She died." "I'm sorry." He nodded, then sipped. "Was she kind?" "She was tired. Even when she smiled." Willa watched the fire reflect in the tin cup. "That's a kind I understand." He set the cup down gently. "You got family?" She laughed once, dry and small. "You're looking at them. No brothers?" "Sisters. Had a brother once. Got himself into whiskey and then into the river. Town blamed me, said I cursed him. I said maybe he just got tired too." Colt leaned forward, forearms on knees. "Is that why you live out here?" "No," her voice softened. "I live here, 'cause it's the one place they don't call me names I didn't ask for." Rosie stirred, turning onto her side. "Wasn't always like this," Willa added. "I used to have a name people said with smiles. Willa. Not that Mabel girl, or the touchy seamstress. Just Willa." He glanced around the room again. There was beauty in it, quiet and bruised, like someone had built a home out of the broken pieces no one else wanted. "I remember you," he said finally. "Oh, that town dance. You wore yellow." She froze. "I didn't laugh," he added. "No, but you didn't stop them either." That cut deeper than he expected. "I was 18, he said slow. "Didn't know how to be useful to anybody. And now." He looked at Rosie, still wrapped in her dream world. "Now I reckon I know how to hold my ground," he said. Willa stood and went to the small shelf near the stove. She pulled out a folded piece of fabric and returned to him. It was a square of linen, hand-stitched with wildflowers. She held it out. "What's that?" "For your vest," she said. So Rosie stopped, saying, "It looks like a storm cloud." He took it. The stitchwork was uneven but earnest, the flowers bright in a way the land hadn't been in years. "I got no money for it," he said. She smiled. "I ain't charged anyone in years. But maybe you could hammer that shutter back up? Keeps knocking all night." He nodded. As he walked outside with the shutter under arm, he heard Rosie's voice from the cabin window. "Mommy, is he our friend now?" Pause. "I think so, baby. He hasn't run yet." Colt fixed the shutter. Then he fixed the door hinge. Then, without being asked, he chopped a bit of wood and left it near the stove. The next day he came back. Didn't knock. Just nodded. And Willa set out 2 cups without a word. Word got around. By week's end, Marvin Deeks at the saloon was whispering, loud enough to be heard, that Colt Merrick had gone soft for the madwoman in the woods. Said he'd seen Colt carrying a ribbon in his pocket. Called it bewitched. Colt heard it but said nothing. He'd learned long ago that a man who wastes breath on fools loses the air he needs for better things. He kept coming. Every day in small ways. Fixed a leaky roof tile. Brought a jar of pickled beans. Once a spool of thread. Willa never thanked him. Not in words. She baked bread. She stitched a small sun into his saddlebag. She sent Rosie to bring him water on hot days. One afternoon, Rosie gave him a tin can filled with fireflies. "So you don't get lonely when you leave." He didn't have the heart to tell her they'd die by morning. He kept them on his windowsill and left the lid cracked. Willa watched from her porch sometimes, eyes thoughtful, hands forever stitching. Always stitching. As if she were mending the world 1 inch at a time. "You believe people can change?" Colt asked her one evening as they shelled peas together. She considered. I think people can remember who they were before the world scared them into silence. He looked at her. You remember? He asked. Some days, she said. Other days I just pretend better. Rosie ran barefoot through the grass, chasing a dragonfly. Laughter, real, loud, bell-clear, escaped her lips. Colt turned toward it, smiled. She didn't laugh like that before, Willa said. She does now. The wind rustled the curtains behind her, veil white, stitched with forget-me-nots. You made those? He asked. She nodded. Out of what was left of my mama's wedding dress. Why hang 'em? So I don't forget beauty, she said. Even when I ain't allowed to wear it. He looked at the cloth again, thin but glowing in the sun. You ever think about startin' over? She met his gaze. You ever think about not runnin'? They stood there, across a gap too wide for hands and too narrow for lies. You want the truth? He asked. Always. I think about it, but I don't know how to begin. Willa looked down at her needle and thread. Then back up. You start with a stitch. She turned and went inside. That night, Colt found a handkerchief folded in his saddle. It had his initials, CM, stitched in uneven thread, just beneath a small sun and clover. The next morning Rosie wasn't outside. He knocked once. No answer. He opened the door. The cabin was empty. The fire cold. On the table sat a note written in shaky but careful script. She took my voice. She said you'd be safer without us. I'll try to come back. But if I don't, please remember you made her feel like a person again. It wasn't signed. But Colt knew. He sat in the chair Willa had just days ago occupied. Picked up the needle left on the windowsill. Held it like a question. And then he stood. Because that's what a man does when something's been taken, quietly, cruelly, and without cause. He stands. Even if he doesn't yet know who did the taking, or what it'll cost to bring them back. The whisper reached town before the wagon did. Someone saw Colt Merrick ride out past the edge of the cottonwoods with fire in his eyes and sewing thread tucked into his vest. Someone else swore they heard Rosie crying into a tin bucket outside the mercantile, and when they asked where Will had gone, the girl clamped her mouth shut like it held something fragile. But by the time the church bell rang Sunday morning, 10 women had gathered in the churchyard, their mouths full of concern and their eyes full of judgment dressed up as Christian mercy. Something's got to be done, said Hattie Deeks, Marvin's sister and the loudest voice in any room she entered. She's got that child out there in filth and superstition, another added, fanning herself though it was a cool morning. She's bewitching that man. I've seen it, he walks different now. I heard she stitched a son into his clothes. That's pagan. And so, under a sky that held the smell of wild onions and dust, the women filled their baskets with stale cornbread, dried apples, and unasked for righteousness, then hitched up their skirts and marched. 10 wide hats, 10 sets of boots, 10 pairs of eyes trained on the hollow where the trees leaned in and secrets whispered too freely. They came not like thunder but like drizzle, relentless, steady, certain. Rosie saw them first. She stood at the edge of the field holding a rag doll made from burlap and old buttons, one of its legs torn. When she spotted the line of women descending the path like a row of crows, her fingers curled tight around the doll's throat. She ran. Colt was splitting logs near the cabin, bare arms glistening with sweat, his shirt tossed over a stump. He looked up, eyes narrowing at the figures moving across the field. Rosie barreled into him, breathless. They're here, she said. The ones who talk like flowers but smell like vinegar. He wiped his hands, tossed on his shirt, and stepped forward. Willa had returned 2 days ago, pale but upright. She hadn't said where she'd gone. Only that someone tried to make her leave again. That they'd taken her to clean her soul, and speak in tongues that weren't hers. She'd escaped with a bruised shoulder and a sprig of sage in her pocket. Now she stood on the porch, quiet, steady, the wind tugging at her wedding veil curtains behind her. The women stopped just shy of the fence. Hattie stepped forward, the rest spreading out in a semicircle like a jury. Their faces were not unkind, but they wore the sort of kindness that leaves bruises, kindness shaped like correction. Willa, Hattie said, her voice honey-thick. We were worried. Willa didn't answer. You went missing. We prayed. Still no reply. We thought maybe it was time to check in on the child. Her gaze slid to Rosie, who clung now to Colt's leg. She's fine, Colt said. A thin woman in blue cleared her throat. You've always been sweet, Colt. But this ain't about you. Seems like it is. Hattie turned toward him, mouth pressing thin. You think we're the villains? We've been nothing but patient. But this woman is confusing the child. She talks to rocks. Stares at birds. And now she's got you acting like you belong to her. I don't belong to nobody, Colt said calmly. But I sure as hell don't belong to you. Another woman took a step forward. We heard about the thread in your coat. We know what that means. What does it mean? He asked. Silence. It means you're in danger, Hattie whispered. Of forgetting who you are. Of being led astray. Colt chuckled once, bitter and low. Who I wasn't worth remembering. The wind picked up, tossing the veils in the window like ghost limbs reaching outward. Willa stepped forward then, bare feet on the porch wood, a shawl around her shoulders. Do you want to take her? She asked. The women looked surprised. You came to check on the child. Do you want to take her? She repeated, voice flat. Rosie's grip tightened on Colt. You can give her a clean bed. A proper name. Teach her not to talk to flowers. Maybe even fix the way she dreams. One woman, younger with a baby fat softness still in her face, looked away. Willa's voice sharpened. Go ahead. Take her. You can teach her that silence is safety. That mending clothes don't mend hearts. That men don't stay unless you make yourself smaller. Willa, Hattie said, color rising to her cheeks. But Willa wasn't finished. Or, you can leave her here. With someone who doesn't mind her broken doll, her wild eyes, her stitched-up hope. Rosie stepped forward then, pulling away from Colt just long enough to grab Willa's hand. I ain't going with them, she said, clear as a bell. The youngest woman began to cry. She's your child? Hattie asked. Willa shook her head. She's mine because she wasn't anyone else's. The air shifted then. Some of the women glanced at each other. Their shoulders lost tension. One lowered her basket to the ground. Another wiped her brow, though no sweat showed. Colt spoke next. She don't need saving, he said. But maybe some of you do. Hattie stiffened. We won't be insulted in the name of madness. No, Willa said softly. You just prefer your madness dressed in Sunday clothes. The women turned then, one by one, like petals folding back into a bud. But Hattie lingered. Her gaze landed on Rosie, then Willa. Something flickered there, a memory maybe, or guilt, or just something too soft to hold in public. She'll end up hurt, she said. Willa nodded. Maybe. But not by me. And then Hattie left, boots loud against the earth. After they were gone, the wind blew softer. Colt knelt and picked up the basket someone had left behind. Inside, half a loaf of cornbread, a small jar of preserves, and a letter, unsigned. You all right? He asked Willa. She nodded. But he saw the tremble in her fingers as she turned to go back inside. That night she didn't stitch. She just sat beside the hearth, watching Rosie draw crooked suns with coal on the floorboards. Colt cooked rabbit stew and poured it into chipped bowls. They didn't speak for a long time. Then Willa said, they almost took her once. Before you ever came. Who? Someone said she'd be better off in an orphan house. That I was dangerous. That I was unsuitable. Colt stirred the fire. Why didn't they succeed? Willa smiled, small and crooked. Because Rosie ran away. Found her way back here with a scrape on her knee and a fistful of dandelions. Told me I was the only one who let her sleep without fear. Colt didn't speak, but his heart tightened in his chest. You think they'll try again? She asked. He shrugged. Let 'em. I got more fence posts. She leaned her head back against the wall and looked up. You're not like the others. Why? You didn't look at me like I was cracked. Just quiet. He looked at her now, firelight tracing her face like a painter's final brushstroke. You ever think maybe the world broke too loud and we're just the ones who heard it? She didn't answer. But she reached across the table and pressed something into his hand. It was a button. Simple. Blow. Carved with a sun and stitched through with red thread. He turned it over. That your promise? He asked. No, she said. That's my truth. He tucked it into his vest. Outside, the wind stilled completely. The next morning, Rosie woke early, saying the chickens were singing in a strange way. When Colt stepped outside to check, he saw what they'd meant. Someone had painted the side of his barn in red. She's a witch. Save the child. The letters bled down the wood like something wounded. And beside it, nailed through a piece of Willa's wedding veil, was a rope. Not tied. Just waiting. The barn still bore the words. No amount of scrubbing or sandpaper dulled the red. It had soaked into the wood like a curse meant to linger. She's a witch. Save the child. The letters bled down, harsh and crooked, trembling like they'd been painted in anger or fear, or both. Colt covered them with an old tarp and leaned his weight against the boards, as if pressing hard enough could make the shame go quiet. It didn't. Behind him, Willa stood at the edge of the field, her skirt brushing the dried wild grass. In her arms she carried a bundle of cloth, dresses folded careful as scripture. Rosie trailed behind her, holding a shovel too big for her hands. "I need to put them down," Willa said. Colt turned. "Put what down?" She lifted the bundle. "All the things I made for girls who laughed at me after. For women who paid with coins but looked at me like I was dirt." He didn't ask what had changed. Maybe the message on the barn had made something final. Maybe it had simply burned away what she hadn't yet buried. He followed her without asking. They moved toward the stand of oaks near the back fence, where the soil softened with loam and the wind hummed low, like it knew not to interrupt. Willa knelt and began to dig. Rosie helped, clumsy but determined, her tongue poking out between her teeth in concentration. Colt stood nearby, silent, watching the shape of grief take form in each shovelful. When the hole was wide enough, Willa unwrapped the bundle. The dresses spilled out like stories, each one faded, beautiful, and wrong. Satin sleeves that had never been danced in. Lace stitched with shaking hands. A hem stained with boot polish. One, pale yellow, still carried the scent of lavender. Willa hesitated, fingers tracing a tiny pearl button. "I made this one for the preacher's daughter," she said. She wore it twice. First to the dance. Then to the trial, when they said I cursed her baby. She laid it gently in the dirt. "This one," she continued, holding up another, "was for Hattie Deeks. She told folks I sewed lust into the seams. Said I was trying to trap her husband." Another dress, dusty rose with embroidery around the cuffs, fell into the hole. "I don't want them in my house anymore," she said. "I don't want them breathing in my walls." Rosie looked up. "Will they grow?" Willa smiled at her. "No, baby. Some things are meant to stay gone." But Rosie pressed her small hand to the pile of fabric. "Can I put something in?" Willa nodded. Rosie unbuttoned the front of her dress and pulled from her pocket a bent thimble and a feather. She dropped them in like prayers. Willa covered the dresses herself, slow and reverent, the way you might bury old names. Colt didn't move. When it was done, she stood and wiped her hands on her apron. "That's the last of them. The last things I made for people who didn't see me." "You could have burned them," he said. "Fire screams. I just wanted quiet." They walked back toward the cabin. The wind shifted. Somewhere nearby, a meadowlark sang once, then went still. Inside, the hearth crackled low. Rosie napped in the corner with her doll, wrapped in one of Willa's old shawls. Colt sat at the table. Willa poured hot water over dried mint and slid him a cup. "I remember the day I realized no one was coming," she said. "Not to save me. Not to explain anything. Just, no one." Colt looked at her hands, calloused, freckled, elegant in motion. "You don't look like someone who needs saving," he said. "No," she agreed. "But I used to want it anyway." She sat beside him. "I thought if I was soft enough, they'd forgive me for not being beautiful in the right way. If I was quiet enough, they'd stop calling me names when I passed. If I worked hard enough, I'd earn the right to stay. And I stayed. But I never stopped being the ghost in their story." Colt sipped the tea. "You're not a ghost to me." She looked at him. "I see you," he said. "Plain and bright." The silence that followed didn't ache. It settled like a warm coat. Willa broke it. "You ever think about leaving this place? Just riding off?" "Used to," he said. "But I got tired of starting over. You don't get to carry your soft things when you run. Someone once told me I talk to flowers." "Do you?" "Yes." "And do they talk back?" Willa smiled. "Sometimes. But only when I'm listening with the part of me that doesn't want anything." Colt nodded. "That's the part that brought me here." The light shifted, drawing long gold fingers across the table. Outside, the wind picked up. It knocked something off the porch. A tink and maybe a rustle. Then quiet. Willa stood, crossed to the window, and looked out. She didn't move. "What is it?" Colt asked. She didn't turn around. There, nailed into the tree at the edge of the yard, was another sign. Crude letters scrawled in tar. "Next time we take the child." Willa's breath caught. Her hand clenched the curtain. Colt stood behind her. His voice steady. "They won't. You don't know that." "I do." She turned to him then, not with fear, but with something older. Something worn thin. "I buried the dresses," she said, voice trembling. "But I can't bury her." "You won't have to." For a long moment they said nothing. Just stood, shoulder to shoulder, watching the wind tug at the trees. Then Willa whispered, "Tomorrow's Sunday." Colt nodded. "They'll be watching. I'll be waiting." And from the corner, without opening her eyes, Rosie mumbled, "Then make sure you're wearing the shirt with the sun stitched inside." That way I can see you, if I get scared. Sunday arrived slow like a heartbeat after grief. The town stirred in quiet unease, doors opened slower, boots scraped against wooden porches more warily. Church bells rang hollow. No hymns followed. Colt Merrick came early. He didn't tie his horse outside the saloon, or leave his hat in the vestibule like the rest. He walked up the center aisle of the church with his shoulders straight, wearing the shirt Willa had mended, sun stitched into the collar, thread still uneven. His boots echoed like a warning. Folks whispered, but no one called out. The preacher faltered mid-sentence. Marvin Deeks stiffened from the back pew, a self-satisfied lean in his spine. Hattie Deeks gripped her Bible like it was a weapon. Colt stopped at the altar. "They left a message on my barn," he said, voice level but low enough to make them lean in. "Said they'd take the child next time. Said she needed Savon. Murmurs rippled through the pews. "She doesn't," Colt continued. "She laughs in the morning. She sleeps without fear. She helps bury what's been lost. That's more than most grown folks can say." Someone near the front coughed. "And Willa Mabel?" Colt said louder. "She's the reason that child's still breathing. The reason I'm still breathing." Gasped this time. Hushed voices. A few turned their eyes away. "You say she's a witch," Colt went on. "Because she sews suns into sleeves and talks to birds. Because she don't cry where you can see it. Because she's still standing after all you did to her." Marvin stood. "She poisoned our town." "She survived your town," Colt shot back. A silence fell so thick the dust in the sunlight seemed to stop moving. Then a small voice from the doorway said, "She didn't survive alone." Rosie stood there, barefoot, hair tangled, a daisy tucked behind one ear. In her hand she held the veil curtain. She walked straight up the aisle and handed it to Hattie. "This belonged to her mama," Rosie said. "She cut it into curtains so we could still feel pretty when we were poor." Hattie held the lace like it burned. Rosie turned to the room. "You all called her things. Said she was strange. But she was kind when nobody else was. And you were scared of that. Because you don't know how to love without rules." No one moved. Then the door creaked again. Willa stood in the threshold. She wore no shoes. No veil. Just a pale blue dress Colt had never seen, one stitched with wildflowers at the hem. Her hair was down, shoulders bare, eyes steady. She didn't look defiant. She looked whole. People stared. And for the first time in years, no one spoke over her silence. She walked past Marvin without flinching. Past the women who once turned their backs. Past the preacher who'd refused to bless her brother's grave. She stood beside Colt. "I didn't come to change your minds," she said. "Just to show Rosie what it looks like to face something, and not look down." Colt looked at her then, not as someone broken, but as someone who had chosen not to stay buried. The preacher cleared his throat. "Miss Mabel," he began, but his voice cracked. She didn't wait. She turned to Rosie and held out her hand. "Let's go." They walked out together. Colt followed. Not a single voice stopped them. Not even Marvin. Outside, the wind caught Willa's dress and lifted the hem like a blessing. Rosie giggled. Colt reached down and took her hand. They crossed the churchyard slow. Heads turned to watch. No one knew what to say. But Rosie did. She said it softly, to no one in particular, and yet to everyone. She said I could pick my name when I turned 6. I picked Rosie because it's a flower that doesn't care if it grows in dirt. Colt smiled. Willa looked over, eyes gleaming. "Still want to leave this place?" she asked. Colt shook his head. "I think I just found something worth building." They reached the edge of town. The wagon was there, repaired. Curtains in the windows again. Colt helped them climb aboard. He took the reins, the morning sun warm across his back. They didn't need to run. They only needed to live forward. As they rode out, Rosie turned around one last time and waved. No one waved back. But someone, one of the younger women, set a pie quietly on the church steps. Colt saw it. He didn't say a word, because some kindnesses come late, but they still count. And what he found inside that falling down cabin wasn't madness or danger or shame. It was a woman who kept love stitched into lace, even after the world tried to tear it from her hands.